So today's topic is relationships post brain injury, TBI, how love can go wrong and how to make it right. So just to go over what I'm going to cover today. So we're going to talk about what's this thing called love and why do we do it even when it can be so darn hard. What is conflict and disconnection in a relationship really about? Because there's a lot of ideas and values and thoughts about conflict and disconnection and what it means. And a lot of it is just misinformation. We're going to talk about what the science says about conflict and disconnection. We're going to talk about the most typical patterns of disconnection and conflict in relationships. And this is so that you can start to get to know what pattern you might get stuck in your relationship. We're going to talk about what I've learned doing EFT with couples who have a brain, where one partner has a brain injury, what I've learned about the vulnerabilities for those with traumatic brain injury, and also for the vulnerabilities for those who love them. What are some of the things that come up underneath those conflicts that keep the conflict going? We're going to talk a little bit about how do some of the TBI symptoms or problems kind of show up in the relationship for each person. So how it is for the person with the brain injury and how it is for the person on the receiving end of that symptom. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how to make it right. All right, so to start with, though, I'm going to show you a little video. This is developed by, back up, my mistake. So let me just start off with getting you to think about something like, why love? Why do we do this thing called love? If we were to look across the globe at all human beings, at our species, what we would find in general in adulthood is that within our species, we pair off 2 by 2. And we try to do that for life. We definitely have long-term monogamous relationships, and within most places in the world, no matter where we would go, we would find that most human beings in our species are also wanting that to be a lifetime thing. So why might that be that we do that, have that behavior? And the answer really lies in it's a survival strategy for our species. So I'm going to ask you a question that's going to help make that clearer. So imagine that you are stuck at night in the jungle. Just think about that. It sounds terrifying. You know, there's like predators and creepy crawlies and all sorts of things that put you at risk. Would you rather be alone in that jungle, alone at night, but with a full belly? Or would you like to be hungry, but with someone you love? Rachel's smiling. I can't see your faces, and I'm not going to make you go on the screen. I wouldn't either if I was being taped.
I would definitely not be alone.
You would not be alone, right? And if people want to unmute their mic and just like say yes to how many people, to those of you that would agree that you would not want to be alone, that you'd rather be hungry but with someone you love in the jungle. If I could just hear.
Yep, over here.
Yeah, over here, yeah. So for most folks, when I ask this question, we don't think about food as not necessary for our survival, but this question to me always really gives me a clear answer. I'm safer in that jungle at night if there's someone who loves me, because that person actually is going to fight for my life more than they're going to fight for their own. And when I think about that, I always think about spy movies and, you know, the spy who's being tortured and they won't give up their secrets. It doesn't matter what kind of torture they're put through until they hear their partner screaming in the other room. And then they will spill everything to save their partner. So when someone really loves us, they will fight for our life more than they'll fight for their own. And that's how it's helped us survive. All right, so I'm going to show you a little video. This research that's talking, it's going to talk about the brain, but I want you just to keep in mind that these findings were with subjects that had no brain injury. So whenever I look at this study, I think, wow, what's happening? How applicable is this to people who have had a brain injury?
So Jane and Carl seek out emotionally focused therapy, or EFT. Before their first therapy session, Jane lies in an MRI machine for a brain scan. She's signaled that a shock to her ankles might be coming. Alone in the machine, her brain lights up like the 4th of July sky, and if and when the shock comes, she reports, it hurts. When a stranger holds her hand, the results are the same. When Carl holds Jane's hand, her brain activity again indicates real alarm, and she says the shock is painful. Contact with her husband does not soothe or calm her brain. After Jane and Carl's last therapy session and bonding conversations, Jane is again alone for the fMRI, and her brain lights up when she sees the X, indicating a shock is coming, and the shock hurts. When a stranger holds her hand, her alarm response and her pain are a little less. But this time, when Carl holds Jane's hand and she sees the X, there's a powerful difference. Nidal brain activity indicating any kind of anxiety or threat can be seen. The loving contact she now perceives from her husband's touch changes how her brain encodes this threat, and she reports that the shock is just uncomfortable. Now that is interesting. In fact, these kinds of results make us forget that we're academics and stuffy old researchers, and remind us how to do a touchdown victory dance with the best of them. But what does this study, especially the brain scan part of it, tell us? First, that when we make sense of love, we can tune into the attachment channel and shape loving feelings in therapy. Yes, you can evoke this mysterious thing called love just by talking in a new way, a deeper, more emotional way with each other. And when we shape this connection, we can change the way our brains respond to threat and pain. Love is a safety cue that literally calms and comforts the neurons in our brain. Second, these results support all the new research on adult love and bonding. They confirm that secure bonds offer us a safe haven from the perils of life and a respite from anxiety, not just when we're 2 or 3 years old, but as adults. The quality of these bonds then have profound implications, not just for happiness, but for mental and physical health and our ability to face life and its uncertainties with poise and grace. This is just the beginning of the new science of relationships. Is there anything more important for us to understand and shape? We all fear facing life alone, and we all long for loving connection, a hand to hold that changes our world into a safer place and soothes our brain. This reminds me of a saying by Jackson Brown. Life is slippery. Take my hand.
I always find myself a little choked up when I watch this video, both because it touches my heart personally, and because it excites me that by fortifying and strengthening relationships with really important people, it excites me to think that perhaps there is something that we can be doing as service providers to calm the brains of people with brain injuries. That makes me happy. And you know, a lot of what this is talking really about is an idea of what we call co-regulation, which is like someone else is calming you down. And you've probably heard the phrase of self-regulation. I've got to self-regulate or calm myself down. And there's a lot of stuff on mindful meditation, but let me just offer you this, that a 15-second hug will reduce your stress more efficiently and better than 15 minutes. So 15-second hug, then 15 minutes of mindful meditation. And nobody had to teach any of you how to hug. You already knew it. So it says a lot about that. I think we've got maybe somebody's mic on. If we're able to mute it. There we go. Okay. So what is this thing called love? It's all about attachment, a phrase you might have heard for children, that most people understand that an attachment relationship for a child is really important, that a child needs to have a strong bond with their parent in order to feel okay. And that has to do with being soothed and comforted. But what we know now in adult love and in the human species is that our attachment needs are birth to grave, that they don't end because we grow up, that we don't become independent from our key relationships, and that your life partner is your attachment figure of choice. And this is what makes it so special, right? Because we don't choose our parents. Our parents choose us, but we don't choose our parents. But with our marital partner, we choose them and they choose us. And that's part of what makes it very special. It runs, as she talked about, it runs on vulnerable emotions. We're going to talk about how to get to those vulnerable emotions. It runs on feelings. People go on a date and say, I just have this feeling that they're the one. I just knew. And it's nothing more than a feeling. Well, I'm going to say feelings are very important. For attachment, we have two attachment needs, sort of groupings of needs. We have safe haven needs. So this is someone that we can turn to for comfort when we're upset, when we're distressed, someone we can turn to hold us when life gets rocky. That's safe haven. And the other one is a secure base. So this is someone who has our back when we're taking risks out in the world. This is someone who believes in us. This is like, you know, when you go out on life's stage and someone says, you've got this, I know you're going to be really great, right? Before I did this talk this morning, I was a little nervous this morning, waking up with my husband, and he said, what's going on with you? And I said, I'm sorry, I'm a little focused. I got to do a talk today. I'm a little nervous. And just before 1 o'clock, I got a text from him saying, you got this, baby. And that makes me feel okay. It makes me feel like I can manage this because he's got my back. All right, a little bit more about attachment. So there's that sort of secure base, safe haven. Really, I like to think about this acronym of "Are you there?" So there's ways that this kind of happens in the relationship, that you're available to me, that you're responsive to me. So when I reach for support, when I say to my husband, I'm a little stressed this morning, that he's responsive. He's like, of course you are. You really care really well, a lot about your work, right? And then that they're empathetic. So he doesn't say, oh, you'll be fine. He says, no, of course you're a little stressed out. This kind of stuff really matters to you. And I know you're going to be great, but I understand why you're a little nervous, right? We don't have to do this all the time either, right? If he had said to me, you'll be fine this morning, I might have been fine this morning. It's a pattern that where it can go wrong. So when we reach for support from our partner and they're not there for us over time, love can go wrong. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that and how it goes wrong. So as I say, when we reach for our partner, if they're not there, there's pretty much two things that a human being's going to do. One is we're going to protest. So we will plead, we will criticize, we will complain, and if we're not heard, we will escalate. We will yell, we will have an adult temper tantrum. You never listened to me. Why aren't you there for me? Remember that time when you weren't there for me? Or we will react by withdrawing. We will go away. We will get quiet. We might go out of our feelings and into our head. We might get quiet. We might say nothing, or we might defend. No, I never said that. I never did that. I don't know what you're talking about. Or we do a combination of both. When this starts to happen, that pattern starts to happen between us, it kind of sets us into a bit of a panic because of the disconnection. And when we do that, we will start to stop sharing as many vulnerable emotions, and we will show more reactive emotions, which I'm going to explain in a little bit, right? And the other thing to be thinking about is, you know, a lot of times when couples come to me am working, I'll hear this. Well, everything would be fine if he just did that, or it's something he does, or it's all my fault. If I could only blah, 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 things would be better. So it's not something that you do, your partner does, or something that I do, right? Like one person's responsible. It's something that the couple has created together. It's a dance they do together. Okay. And most importantly, I love when I'm working with couples, this is where it's so important. Love goes wrong because we mean so much to each other. We impact each other so much, so that if I say to my partner, I'm upset, and he doesn't hear me, I'm going to feel that's going to hurt, right? Because he means so much, because I need him and he needs me. It's not because we don't care. It's quite the opposite. Okay, I talked a little bit about reactive versus vulnerable emotions, right? So reactive emotions is what we see on the outside. So this could be anger, criticism, nagging. It could be withdrawal or being absent. And underneath that, there's more vulnerable emotions. I will say sometimes people know what these vulnerable emotions are, and sometimes when they first start to be curious about this, they don't even feel anything inside. It's so shut down. But in those more vulnerable emotions are feelings of sadness, fear, vulnerability, hopelessness, and loneliness. All right. So this phrase demon dialogue is one that gets used in the EFT community to describe the most typical patterns of conflict we see between couples. And I'm going to talk about the demon dialogues because the first sort of way of making this better is to know we're stuck in a bad dance. We're in this bad pattern with each other and watching that bad pattern. So Sue would say emotions are the music of our social interaction, and the dance are the steps we make in response to them. Okay. So the first and most common conflict type or demon dialogue we see is the polka protest. So this is where one partner might complain, and when the other one does not respond, they poke and they criticize while the other one shuts down or defends. The more one complains, the more the other shuts down, and it's an endless cycle. So it doesn't really matter. I started with the one that complains, but it could be the other one shutting down first. But it's like an infinity loop that just goes on and on and on. Underneath, each partner feels more lonely and more rejected. And the underlying message in this dialogue is, where are you? I can't find you. I can't make contact with you. Or I can't face your disapproval, so I'll turn off now. Okay. The second common conflict type we see is what we call find the bad guy. So these can become very dramatic and fast, but they're kind of like battles where both partners kind of throw missiles at each other just to gain a sense of control. And underneath it, each partner feels rejected, but might protect themselves through the stance of, it's not me that's mad or bad, it's you. I don't have the problem, I'm fine. And then finally, if couples are stuck in either find the bad guy or polka protest for a really long time, you might find that they go into fight or freeze. So this is where they give up on safe connection and distance takes over. Underlying this pattern, partners can lose hope. They can turn away from each other to nurse their own wounds. And the deeper messages are, I am hurt and afraid. I'm going to just hunker down. I'm going to let us go, or I'm just going to do my own thing. Okay. So this first step is when people can start to recognize, oh, we're in one of our patterns. We're in one of our cycles. It doesn't really matter what we're fighting about. It's actually how we're fighting that we're going to start to look at. And oh goodness, we're in one of these patterns. Yes, we're stuck in our dance. And the second is to discover the vulnerabilities you feel under the dance. All right, I'm going to show you a little video. It's comedy video that's watching a couple fight, and they're talking not about what they're fighting about, but they're talking about the steps they're making with each other in the fight. So this will give you a feel for what these look like.
Affectionate nickname for husband asked in a question?
Distracted affirmative answer.
Question about whether or not you completed a mundane task.
Distracted affirmative answer.
Sigh. Follow-up question about a small detail of the task to prove that you actually completed the task.
Sudden realization of what you are talking about. Quick excuse about the small detail to hide that I was both not paying attention and did not do what you wanted.
Accusing response.
Defensive answer.
Listing the times you behaved this way before.
Weak excuse.
Explanation of all I do for you in a 24-hour period.
Explanation of all I do for you in a 24-hour period. Pausing moment where I realize I don't actually do that much.
Escalating tone as I state my disbelief that you did not complete the simple task from earlier.
Raising my voice as I repeat my lame excuse for not doing it.
Telling you not to raise your voice while raising mine as well. Calling for maternal parent.
Ignoring my female offspring and explaining how nagging you always are.
Equally ignoring her as I gasp in disbelief. Yelling for paternal parent.
Continuing to ignore her and bringing up the fight from the summer of 2002 where it was decided that you were actually the one to blame. Smugly inquiring if you recall said event.
Reluctant acknowledgement.
Sports reference, confirmation of points received.
Frustrated grunt followed by a statement about your brain capacity.
Accidental agreement.
Parental guardians.
Frustrated and questioning response.
Asking for permission to do something you've already responded negatively to. Exasperated repetition of daughter's name. Focusing my pleading on my paternal parent and changing my physical appearance to remind him of when I was a little girl.
Starting to side with my daughter.
Negative response, restating my disapproval from earlier.
Statement about how differently I will treat my own children someday that will never actually be realized.
Disbelief that you would take her side of the argument over mine. Statement of finality explaining I will not continue this discourse.
Indifferent response.
Beginning my brisk and dramatic exit.
Request to stop exiting. Question about dinner?
So that was a polka protest. She was escalating, getting more upset, and he was shutting down initially and then defending. So it's like he puts up a wall for her displeasure at him. And the more he puts up a wall, the more she escalates to try to make contact with him through that wall. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about under the water. What is underlying these feelings, and these are some of the things that clients have really shared with me about what it's like and how it feels inside. So I hope that I speak to them in ways for people that are here today who have a brain injury. I hope I represent some of your feelings well. I probably won't capture everything, but under the water. For people with brain injuries, a lot of insecurity about having a brain injury. There can be fear about being a disappointment if they can't work or can't contribute the same way to the household, and more sensitivity to criticism from their partners, which can sometimes result in defensiveness or withdrawal, just shutting down. So those comments when a partner misses it can really sting. They can have fears that their thoughts and ideas are no longer valid or legitimate. So even if your ideas are the same kinds of ideas that they were before you had the brain injury, suddenly you're questioning them. Do my ideas have merit? Do my thoughts have merit? Am I legit? Are things I hear a lot? Am I stupid now? And so what I often see is that they may share their thoughts less, or you may actually perseverate. Like, I'm like a dog on a bone. You're not hearing me. You're not hearing me. You're not hearing me, as a way of seeking validation. People can question their value or their place in key relationships. So like as a husband or as a wife, I had a guy who was talking about how his wife has stayed by his side, even though he even said right out, even though I don't have as much value to her as a husband, here she has stayed by my side. And of course, she burst into tears when he said that and said, "Oh my gosh, do you really think that I fell in love with you because you're your work or you're a mechanic? I fell in love with you because of who you are." And that's the same. Our identity is not just how we define ourselves, but it's also how we see ourselves as lovable and valuable in the world, right? So I'm a social worker. It's about, there's a piece of this is about being a good person, being a kind person. These are qualities I would want to have loved about me. Sometimes around that value, it's just not having enough power. So you need help of other people more, and being in a position of receiving help can feel very powerless. It feels like you're not as in much control. Other people have more control than you do. And then also people with brain injury can just shut down because of a lack of safety. There's stigma there about having a brain injury in society at large that can just really show up in the relationships. And it's really hard to talk about for people. It's very painful. When my clients get to this stage in the couples therapy that they're talking about this stuff, there's a lot of tears and there's a lot of pain, because it's places inside that hurt, but places underneath the water that can lead to a lot of questions about value, a lot of questions about being useful, and having and being wanted. For caregivers underneath the water. So you can see outward changes in your partner and grieve the loss of the partner you had. And a lot of times, actually, the changes are really on the surface. The person's the same. You start, when I'm doing therapy with couples, they start to really recognize each other in the values that stay the same, in the longings that stay the same, in the tendencies that stay the same. It's just that sometimes the behaviors change. So I had, for example, one guy who never would have sworn in front of his family before. And when I met him, I said, "How are things different?" He says, "I say wrong words now." And he, he has a value against that. And yet at times when he's really upset, he might swear. So these changes can manifest as complaints about how their partner was, or denial that it's the TBI. They say, "Oh, it must be you," and there's a little bit of hope in that, right? Like if it's them, then they could change. If it's the brain injury, it's the brain injury. Maybe it's not as easy to change. Caregivers can feel lonely and unseen for their caregiving efforts. So they can feel uncared for, unloved, all alone, or isolated in the new tasks that they're taking on, which can result in some protest or some shutdown. "You never see me, you're not grateful," that kind of thing. And it can feel like too much power. It can feel like, I don't want to have to make decisions for my partner. I don't want to have to tell them that was not appropriate, or you shouldn't have said that. Like that's a terrible position for a partner to be in. It feels more like a parent-child relationship, so that can feel really yucky and uncomfortable. Feeling unsafe or frightened when they can't recognize their partner. So the partner of the guy who said the wrong words was feeling quite unsafe. She thought this was abuse, because she'd never seen it before. And this one bothers me all the time. Often caregivers are left out of the treatment. So the person with the brain injury has this entourage of people that they turn to for support, and they're not turning to their loved one for that same kind of support. And so caregivers can really feel off on the side. Both can feel very alone in their experiences and separate, and traditional support systems often do separate you guys. I've seen, I don't know, the model of there's the group for those with the brain injury and then the group for the caregivers at the same time is like just a classic example of how separate, how separate people feel from each other. And both can withdraw to protect each other. Like it's hard to say, you know, I'm having a really hard time because you're different than you were that before. Because if you love that person, that might sound very offensive. So they might keep these feelings to themselves as an effort to protect. All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit, and this is not an exhaustive list of TBI symptoms. It's just some of the ones that I see quite commonly and how they show up in the relationship. And Rachel, can I ask you, can you see do you guys see my whole slide, or is the part over to one side covered by our faces?
No, we can see the whole slide, Wendy.
Excellent. I can't. Okay, so memory problems. For those with brain injury, there can be fears and insecurities about trusting your mind to remember. And when you forget, especially when you forget about someone important, there can be a lot of shame or guilt, or they can feel wrongly accused, like I didn't do that on purpose. For those who love someone with a TBI, they can feel forgotten, like they don't matter, kind of like, am I not in your mind? Am I not memorable? Am I not one of those things that really gets your attention? And that can hurt. Processing difficulties. So for those with brain injuries, it can feel really overwhelmed, especially in a conflict, right? It's too much coming at you all at once. And it's interesting when we're doing EFT, we often ask for, what does it feel like in your body? And only people with brain injury give me this description of things like, it's like, one guy said, it's like bees are all around my head, right? Another guy said, it's like these hammers coming in at me all over the place. And so what we often see is either people kind of like get away from me, that kind of action, which of course that makes sense if you had bees at your head, or you may withdraw from your partner when it's getting to be too much. And for partners, it can feel like they don't matter. And if the action is like swatting away, it can feel unsafe. Sensory overwhelm, so just normal stimuli can become really intense and needing to withdraw, but it feels lonely. So this is like the Christmas dinner. There's all these smells and tastes and clinks and sounds and people and lights and activity and change and all that. And that can just knock you right on your knees. And so you have to withdraw from it and be away from it, but that can feel very lonely. And sometimes for those who love someone with a brain injury in these moments, it can feel like, or be experienced, especially if there's insecurity, as a rejection. Like they're not that they're leaving this situation because they can't be in this situation, but because they don't want to be in the situation. Low frustration tolerance, I'm going to talk a little more extensively about, but you know, for example, my guy who now swears, he can feel useless, very embarrassed, and very overwhelmed at times. And for people on the receiving end of it, can feel unsafe, criticized, or judged. Expressive language problems. So sometimes it's hard to express your inner world. And sometimes, so you say little now, or it could be that you say too much. But it can just be hard to let people know this is what's happening inside of me. And communication is really how we connect with others. And so you can feel very disconnected in that. And for those on the other receiving end, they can feel also disconnected and like there's not enough space for them, or like they're not important enough for you to let them know. Perseveration, so getting stuck on the same thing. Those with brain injury can feel unheard, misunderstood. They can feel like their needs aren't being met. And those who love someone with a brain injury can feel overwhelmed. They can feel useless, like I want to make you feel better, but I don't know how. And then frustrated. As I say, this is not an exhausted list. It's often why we do a lot of brain injury education, particularly for caregivers, because we want that understanding and empathy that this is not being done intentionally, that this isn't about the relationship or about how they feel about you. This is what their brain used to do for them and isn't doing for them anymore. When cycles get out of hand. So the number one reason for couples to come to see me when there's a brain injury is because their fights have escalated at times into aggression. So maybe someone's lashed out and hit, or there's been violence in them. And I wanted to speak specifically about that. It's a lot more common in brain injury because of the injury. So the frontal lobes, the thinking brain, actually the temporal lobes as well, it really lessens these outward aggression, which comes from a much deeper area of the brain, but also the insecurities. So those deeper areas of the brain where the emotion comes from is like boiling more because of the insecurities, feeling less valuable, fearing rejection, more attachment insecurity. And then for the couple in general, feelings of loss and grief, which for everybody results in a lot of really strong feelings. Cycles getting out of hand are not about power and abuse. So that is often sort of what people are wondering about when they start with me. Is this about, am I in an abusive relationship now? And it's really not. It's an elevated reaction to the cycle, in the cycle. And there's a lot of research on this in normal couples, and even within normal couples, it's usually not about power and abuse. And if they're seeking out couples therapy, it's definitely not. The people where those rare instances where it is about power and abuse, they're not coming to couples therapy. They're not on a call like this trying to find out about how to make it better. It's really an elevated reaction in the cycle. And John Bowlby, who was the first psychologist to talk about attachment, he talked about this concept of proximity seeking aggression. So this is like the little kid having a temper tantrum, right? And this is an attempt to seek contact with, or get through, or connect with the partner. And the longing underneath it is to be understood and be heard and seen. And what's really amazing is that when couples put that one together, often what we see is that the aggression it just goes away quite quickly, because they understand, actually, I'm trying to get through to you. I'm trying to be understood. And when I can't make that contact with you, I go into a panic and it gets bigger. The second one that has come more recently in the attachment research is the idea of distance seeking aggression. So this can be like the person feels backed into a corner. Their partner they may feel like their partner's just coming at them, criticizing, complaining, like in that video with the wife whose voice is getting louder and feeling backed into a corner. And this aggression is more like a back off before I detonate kind of aggression. And in both cases, if there's times when things get escalated, even verbally escalated, if you can connect the feeling to what the goal is. So am I trying to get through to this person, or am I trying to get space from this person? That usually is one of the first important ingredients in making it better. Okay. Talk a little bit about getting secure. So I've said a few of these things already, right? See it's a cycle and talk about it with each other. Talk about the feelings under the cycle and connect them to your behaviors in the cycle. So for example, when you don't hear me, I feel alone and scared, and I'll do just about anything to get you to hear me, even yell to make contact. And when you criticize me like that, it's really hard to hear. I withdraw because you affect me so much, and I can't face your disappointment. And then next is to connect them together. You're going to sew that whole thing together, right? Is when you aren't there for me, I nag to get through to you. And when you nag, it's hard to hear, and I feel rejected and I withdraw. The more you nag, the more I withdraw. The more I withdraw, the more you nag. And we both end up feeling hurt and disconnected. So when couples get to this stage and I'm working with them and they can see this is this pattern we're in, that's our enemy. That's what's not working for us. These defenses we're trying to use here aren't working for us. That's what's wrong, not us. That's when couples start to have less conflict. We know they need to go further, which is to have what we call hold me tight conversations. So talking about these vulnerabilities. And usually when the conflict is de-escalated, there's a lot more safety to talk about those insecurities. Risk showing your feelings with about those insecurities. So I openly say to my husband in the morning, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit off in space. I'm feeling really nervous. I want to do a good job and I'm nervous. I don't know if I'm going to be enough today. Right? I could say that to him about him, you know, like, oh, last night I left you a message about something really important and you forgot. And I really got scared that maybe you don't care about me. And so you risk taking that and sharing that. Talk about how they make you feel about yourself and let your partner know what you need when you feel this way. So I'll say to him, you know, when I'm feeling this way, I just need you to kiss me on the forehead and say, I love you, baby, which he does. And it works every single time. When your partner shows you those insecurities, let yourself feel their pain. It sounds like crazy, but let yourself feel their pain. Because what happens when we do that is it results in empathy, responsiveness, and connection. Oh my God, I don't want you hurting, baby. I want you to feel better. I am so sorry that happened for you. I'm here for you, right? My husband, who's like big man, big tough guy, right? He will say the sweetest things to me sometimes, like, he'll say, like, I get really scared, actually, if I don't get this right, you're just gonna leave me and find another man. And I let myself feel that and go, honey, oh my God, that's terrible. No wonder you're nervous. There's nobody else for me. You're my guy and I'm not going anywhere. You can screw up all you like and we'll figure it out together, okay? Right? So there's a lot of listening too, and empathy and letting it in, which can be hard. Because you can take it personally. Like, I've been loving you well enough, right? Problem solve your problems after you've calmed yourselves down like this. Then you can conquer the world. And if you're stuck, which happens, get help. I'm going to show you a little visual in case you're a visual person of how this works. We call this the EFT hand dance. It's actually like a description of the therapy process we do, but it's all the steps I just told you.
Everybody, let's do the EFT hand dance. Okay, we're going to start at step 1, and step 1 is assessment, right? We assess what's going on, what their problems are, and we establish a safe and secure place and create a strong therapeutic alliance. And step 2, we're starting to track the negative cycle, right? We're trying to track the dance between the couple. And then in step 3, we're accessing the underlying emotion for one and putting it back into the cycle. And then we're accessing the underlying emotion for the other partner and putting it back into the cycle. And then we're reframing in step 4 the problem as the cycle, and we get cycle de-escalation and everything starts to calm down so that we can move into stage 2. And in stage 2, we start with our withdrawer, we hold our pursuer, and we help the withdrawer walk around in their internal emotional experience, share that with their partner, and there's a bonding moment. And then we shift to the pursuer, and we hold the withdrawer, and we help the pursuer walk around in their internal emotional experience. They share that with their partner, and there's a bonding moment. And now we're in stage 3, and we've got consolidation, and they're in a new positive cycle of interaction. And sometimes they let go and they break off, but they get back together again. And it's time then to say bye-bye. Everybody, let's do everybody.
All right. And then if you need more help, there's some resources that you can access. The book Hold Me Tight by Sue Johnson's a great read. It goes through all of this sort of process that I've given an overview of. There's a workbook called the Emotionally Focused Workbook for Couples. It'll dig into it a little bit deeper with some of these concepts and how to improve things in the relationship and in the bond. For media, I've given you a link to a YouTube channel. This is an EFT therapist in the States, Rebecca Jorgensen, who's just curated a lot of really great videos on relationships and how to make them better. And then also the link to a podcast called We Heart Radio, and We Heart Radio is for therapists and clients, and it's all things about emotionally focused therapy, but this specific one is about relationships and chronic illness, and I think there's a lot of relevant stuff there for people with brain injuries in terms of the chronic sort of nature of the problem. You can take a Hold Me Tight workshop with your partner. I've given a link to find a Hold Me Tight workshop. So this would be with some help and with other couples. And then there's also a link to finding an EFT therapist.